Thank you. Actually, I'm a little intimidated following Dr. Laszlo. That was brilliant, sir. Thank you very much for your contribution. Maybe I'll just start with the 3 stories from my little granddaughter. You know, I've been coming to Noetic Sciences for many years. There was a time when I used to consider myself a junior. Now I'm a senior. So I have a 3.5-year-old granddaughter. And a few months ago, I was walking with her on the beach in San Diego. She comes for the weekends. Her name is Tara, which in India means star, the stellar star. So we were walking at night. It was a brilliant moon, starlit sky. And she reaches up to here, maybe. And I looked at her and I said, Tara, I really love you very much. And she said, how much? Okay. So as soon as I finished the sentence, she said, how much? So I said, well, more than the stars and the moon. And she said, why? So I said, because you came from the stars and the moon. And she said, how? And for a moment I had to think, and I said to myself, maybe I can't give her a lecture on photosynthesis, but let me try. So I said, Tara, you're a being of light. And all those stars and the sun and all those galaxies, everything out there, that's the light that nurtures everything here. And when you eat your fruit and vegetables, you're actually eating light. You're made out of light. Your body is made out of light. And even your eyes are made out of light. So the stars gave you light so that you could make eyes, and then you could look up and the stars would be able to see themselves. And she said, nothing. For the first time, she was quiet. And I've never seen this 3-year-old, 3.5 now, so quiet. I could just see by the look in her eyes and her face that she was in deep thought. 15 minutes went by, and then we were leaving the beach, and she tapped me on my knee, which is about how high she reaches. And she said, Nana, look up. I said, why, baby? She said, the stars want to see themselves. So she got it. She got it. That the one who looks through your eyes and the one who looks through my eyes and the one who looks through the eyes of an insect or a honeybee or a butterfly or a tiger or any sentient being on our planet is the same one. There's only a single consciousness, and that single consciousness has differentiated into every observer, every process of observation, and every object that can be observed. When I was little, growing in India, I used to read J. Krishnamurti, and I never, as a child, I never really understood what he meant when he said that the observer is the observed. Never really understood that, and it took me several years to go through all this mechanistic medicine to begin to understand that consciousness is not an epiphenomenon, that consciousness is the phenomenon. And everything else is the epiphenomenon. And when Dr. Laszlo said we have a spiritual crisis, yes, that's the crisis we have in our world today. And that's the crisis that has also given rise to the crisis of perception. I think if I were to really hone into the crisis of spirituality, it's the crisis that has given rise to the perception that, in fact, the observer is somehow outside that which is being observed. There's a beautiful poem by Rumi where he says, "I've lived on the lip of insanity, wanting to know reasons, knocking at the door opens, I've been knocking from the inside." And I think the fatal flaw of all our science has been to separate the observer from the observed. I'm here and there you are, the universe. When in fact, the observer is also an activity of the universe. The observer is an activity of the universe. And if we could just have that little shift in our understanding, I think a critical mass of that shift in our understanding experientially would completely transform the world. Because consciousness is what differentiates into perception, what we experience as the world out there, into cognition, our knowing, into our moods and emotions, our feelings, into our biology, into our behavior, into our social interactions, into our personal relationships, and ultimately into what we call the environment. So that when I look at this, really, this flower, I think I'm looking at a flower, but really I'm not. I'm looking at myself, literally. I'm not talking metaphorically. To a honeybee, this flower would look something else. Honeybee can't sense the usual wavelengths of light, so sensing ultraviolet, it sees honey from a distance. A snake experiences its environment as infrared radiation, a bat as the echo of ultrasound. I don't know what this would look like to a chameleon whose eyeballs swivel on two different axes. Every act of observation is an act of self-observation. And it is that single self that is differentiating into all this. So right now we, as Dr. Laszlo said, are at a very critical stage in our evolution. I was talking to another scientist friend of mine, and he said that if insects disappeared from our planet today, then in about 5 years, all life on this planet would cease, because they are such an important part of our ecosystem. He said afterwards that if human beings disappeared from our planet today, then in 5 years, life would flourish on this planet. So here we are, so brilliant, so intellectual, so rational, so smart, we think, but we are the biggest predator on this planet, risking the extinction of other species, now risking our own extinction. And you know the way it's going. What we call a superpower, or those countries that say are superpowers, and I'm saying this in the heart of, Washington, but superpowers could become irrelevant very fast. And that's because, hold it for a moment, because in a few years, you'll have technology, like the one I have right now in my hand, a little better. But this little thing is a computer, it's a phone. I can send emails and text messages anywhere in the world. I can send pictures. I can receive pictures. I can even take videos and send them anywhere. And yesterday, as I was flying on the plane, and I'm sure you have, every day you fly on the plane, they tell you, turn it off, because it might interfere with air traffic signals. In about 10 years, any sophisticated information technologist will need just something like this to interfere with all air traffic signals, not hijack one plane, but hijack every plane in the sky. Move a few electrons and cut off electricity in a place like Washington. or move a few other electrons and interfere with the nuclear plant and cause a leak, or poison the food chain, or stop the food supply, interfere with not only air transport, but rail transport and everything else. What happens when we have that? What happens when we have this kind of technology and our ancient, tribal, diabolical habits? It's a devastating combination, because then B-52 bombers don't work. Nuclear shields become irrelevant. Armies become irrelevant. Navies, Air Force, everything becomes irrelevant. Information technology becomes the tool for total destruction. And there's no superpower then. It could happen anywhere and doesn't need too many people. So it is, Dr. Laszlo just said, it could be a total breakdown. Or it could be a breakthrough, as he said. And that breakthrough has to be through a shift in consciousness. There's no other solution. There is no solution to the world's problems, whether they are economic or ecological, or the economic disparities that he mentioned again. When 50% of the world lives on less than $2 a day, 20% of it lives on less than $1 a day. 8 million people die every year because they are too poor to live. 40,000 children died of hunger-related causes yesterday. 40,000 will die today, and 40,000 will die tomorrow. It's not part of the news. Ecology, economic disparities, conflict, terrorism, war, social injustice, they're all a tangled hierarchy, as Dr. Goswami would say. They're a tangled hierarchy. They interdependently co-arise. And unless we can create a new context that comes from a shift in consciousness, there is no solution. But I think the great paradox of being human is that while we have this really dark side to us, we also have a divine part where we are the only species who ask questions like, what does it all mean? Where did I come from? What am I doing here? What's the purpose of my existence? What happens to me after I die? Do I have a soul? Does God exist? And if she does she care about us? No other animal asks these questions. So in the mere asking of questions, where did I read somewhere that the universe is a field of possibilities that is compelled to make choices when asked questions. Is it particle-like? If you ask a particle-like question. Is it wave-like? If you ask a wave-like question. So it's time to ask questions. Really ask questions. We can't be doing the same thing over and over again to start getting different kinds of results. One of the most interesting things in evolutionary biology is what are being called by Dr. Laszlo and others quantum leaps in evolution. There's no fossil record, for example, that shows the transformation or transition from amphibians to birds or from primates to humans. These are expressions of creativity in the cosmos. These quantum leaps are presumably orchestrated through intent or intentionality. So those of us who feel comfortable with teleology will say that a giraffe has a long neck because there was an intention to reach up to that tree, that a camel has a certain kind of anatomy because there was an intention to cross the desert, or that birds have wings because amphibians had the intention to fly. That intention orchestrates its own mechanisms in evolutionary biology. And it does so through creativity. As a physician, many years ago I realized that all healing when it occurs, spontaneous remission or healing when it occurs, is an expression of biological creativity. That just creativity is not just a function of the intellect, but it's a function of our whole biology. And creativity is inherent in the cosmos, and the more we are learning about processes in the universe, it's becoming obvious that the universe is imbued with subjectivity. I remember many years ago, I happened to be at a gathering with Ilya Prigozhin when he had just won the Nobel Prize, and this was a long time ago, and I happened to be sitting next to him. And at one point I asked him, he had just finished speaking, I said, "Do you think the universe is creative?" He says, "Immensely creative." So the next question I asked him was, if it's immensely creative, is it conscious? And he didn't reply. He said, "I'll have to think about that." But it occurred to me afterwards, if it's so creative, then it must be conscious. And today many scientists are saying that photons are the carriers of both subjective and objective information. That when you dream, the universe is dreaming through you. When you think thoughts, the universe is thinking those thoughts through you. And of course, there are hierarchies of levels of intensity of this consciousness and their expression of creativity, but the whole universe is conscious, creative, evolving through intent and held together through intention. There's a beautiful poem of Raul Seixas, the Brazilian poet, who says, "A dream that I dream alone is just a dream, but a dream that we dream together could be reality." And so, Lynn Twist, who introduced me, she's there, beautiful woman and wonderful person, she told me a few years ago this story about metamorphosis, and I'm a scientist and biologist and didn't know this, but after that I really started to look at it in a very deep way, because metamorphosis is also a great example of a quantum leap of creativity. This is what happens when a caterpillar, which is a worm, transforms into a butterfly. I'll give you the small version. First I heard from Lynn Twist and then Elizabeth Sartoris and many others. At a certain stage of its development, a caterpillar starts to consume a little bit more than its metabolic needs. And what happens is that its body starts to die a little bit here and a little bit there and decay. And in the body of that caterpillar, there are a few cells that scientists refer to as the imaginal cells. Imaginal, as to imagine. And when the immune cells of the caterpillar's body look at these imaginal cells, they say, they seem different, so they attack them. But for some reason, the imaginal cells don't even react. They just keep gathering in little clusters. And then they gather in more clusters, and soon the clusters start to connect with each other. And then when that connectivity of those clusters of imaginal cells starts to reach a critical mass, a critical threshold of connectivity, then something really magical happens. A dormant gene that's been lying there, asleep, wakes up. And it's the genetic code, the information code for everything that could be a butterfly. Not just wings. Of course, you need wings, but you need a new metabolic rate, you need legs, you need antenna, you need eyes, you need neurons with navigational skills, because monarch butterflies that are born in Massachusetts, once a year they go all across the United States, they go down the coast of California, they go through Mexico, they go to the Brazilian rainforest, and then the next generation comes back to the same tree, to the same branch, from where its ancestor came. That's remarkable navigation. And a few neurons code for that navigation that navigates through, the arrangement of stars and galaxies and electromagnetic fields. So this is a quantum leap of creativity from a worm with a low metabolic rate to a completely new species. Some scientists have given the analogy that you take your bicycle to the repair shop and you go to pick it up and there's a Gulfstream jet waiting for you. And it's the same stuff that you took there. So dramatic is that transformation. And this I heard also from Elizabeth, from Lynn Twist and Elizabeth, that at a certain stage the imaginal cells start to use the dying, decaying carcass of the caterpillar as its nutritive soup. It becomes the culture medium in which these cells grow. And soon that flight to freedom takes place. So I never tire of listening to this story and talking to biologists, because also certain hormones come into play that are actually orchestrated by the movement of the stars and galaxies. Those hormones, their technical names, ectozyme and juvenile hormone, that are secreted by these new cells that actually synchronize the activity of the caterpillar's decay and the butterfly's birth with the symphony of the cosmos. Imagine that kind of amazing synchronization, a non-local correlation that starts to occur. I said the reason I never tire of listening, talking about this, is two reasons. One, I also discovered that the gene that codes for the wings of the butterfly is the same gene that codes for the beating of the human heart. Nature discovered this genetic code 300 million years ago. And then she said to herself, I'll put it away, I'll store it, and one day I will power the human heart with this. Because that's where longing is, that's where dreams come from, that's where love and compassion reside. So that's one reason I love this story, and the other is that I think here we are, a very significant cluster of imaginal cells. And there are many clusters, the Budapest Club and many clusters of these imaginal cells. It's time to use our technology to connect these clusters. Noetic Sciences, Budapest Club, Alliance for the New Humanity, Resurgence, so many clusters of imaginal cells. And once we reach that critical mass, then nothing will hold us back. Rumi says, when I die, I will soar with angels, and when I die to the angels, what I shall become, you cannot imagine. It's beyond our imagination where we could go. But we have to start dreaming, and we have to start dreaming together so that the universe can reach that critical level of dreaming that will give birth to this new reality. Thank you.